Two companies you've probably never heard of control more wealth than most countries possess. They own pieces of every major corporation, influence every major policy decision, and shape the direction of the global economy while operating almost completely outside public scrutiny. BlackRock and Vanguard together manage over $20 trillion in assets. That's more than the GDP of the United States and China combined. But here's what makes this absolutely terrifying. They're the largest shareholders in 90% of S&P 500 companies, meaning they effectively control corporate America while maintaining the illusion of market competition. We're talking about a level of economic concentration that would make the robber barons of the early 1900s look like small-time operators. These two firms don't just invest money. They vote on corporate boards, influence executive compensation, determine environmental policies, and shape political agendas while claiming to be passive investors. The numbers are staggering in every dimension. BlackRock manages $10.6 trillion in assets while employing fewer people than a large department store. Vanguard controls $8.1 trillion while operating with the bureaucratic efficiency that would be envied by any government agency. Together, they wield more economic power than any institution in human history. But here's what makes their story absolutely incredible. They've achieved this dominance not through superior products or innovative technology, but through a simple accounting trick called index fund investing that allows them to own everything while claiming they own nothing. Index funds were sold to investors as a way to democratize investing, allowing regular people to own small pieces of the entire stock market. Instead, they became the greatest concentration of corporate power in history, where two firms collect money from millions of investors and use that money to control every major corporation in America. BlackRock and Vanguard vote the shares, not the actual investors. They sit on corporate boards, not the people whose money bought the shares. They influence corporate policies, environmental strategies, and political positions, while the real investors have zero say in how their money is used to shape society. This isn't just about making money. This is about the systematic capture of capitalism itself, where free markets have been replaced by coordinated control from two firms that answer to no government, face no meaningful competition, and operate with essentially no oversight. The most disturbing part: most people have no idea this is happening because BlackRock and Vanguard have perfected the art of invisible control, wielding unprecedented power while maintaining the appearance of boring, bureaucratic investment management. This is the story of how two companies built the largest economic empire in human history while convincing everyone they were just managing retirement funds. To understand how BlackRock and Vanguard achieved their stranglehold over the global economy, you need to understand what investing looked like before they revolutionized it with a simple but devastating innovation, convincing millions of people to give up control of their money in exchange for the promise of market average returns. Before the 1970s, investing was straightforward. If you bought stock in General Motors, you owned a piece of General Motors. You received dividends. You could vote in shareholder meetings, and you had direct influence over corporate decisions proportional to your ownership stake. Investment was direct ownership with direct control. Professional money management existed, but it operated through active strategies where fund managers tried to beat the market by selecting superior stocks, timing market movements, and conducting detailed company analysis. Investors paid high fees but retained meaningful influence over investment decisions and portfolio composition. The system had problems: high fees, inconsistent performance, and complexity that excluded many regular investors from meaningful market participation. But it maintained a direct connection between ownership and control that preserved the fundamental principles of market capitalism. The revolution began with an academic insight that would reshape global finance. Eugene Fama's efficient market hypothesis, which argued that markets were so efficient at processing information that actively managed funds couldn't consistently outperform simple market indexes. This insight suggested a radical alternative to active management. Instead of trying to beat the market, simply buy everything in the market through index funds that would automatically deliver market average returns while charging minimal fees. The concept seemed revolutionary and democratic. Rather than paying high fees to fund managers who couldn't beat the market anyway, investors could achieve market returns through low-cost index funds that required no expertise, market timing, or stock selection. John Jack Bogle founded Vanguard in 1975, specifically to offer index fund investing to regular investors, arguing that low fees and market average returns would enable ordinary Americans to build wealth without requiring sophisticated financial knowledge or expensive professional management. The Vanguard innovation was elegant in its simplicity. Create mutual funds that owned all the stocks in market indexes like the S&P 500, charge minimal management fees, and distribute the returns to investors. No stock picking, no market timing, no expensive research, just buy everything and hold it forever. But there was a crucial detail that few people understood at the time. When investors bought shares of Vanguard index funds, they weren't buying direct ownership of the underlying stocks. They were buying shares of funds that owned the stocks, meaning Vanguard retained voting control over corporate decisions. This distinction seemed meaningless when Vanguard was a small fund company with limited assets. Index funds were a niche product for academics and financial professionals who understood the theoretical benefits but weren't moving markets or influencing corporate behavior. Everything changed as index funds grew from academic curiosity to dominant investment strategy. As more money flowed into index funds, Vanguard accumulated voting control over larger percentages of every major corporation, while individual investors gave up their direct ownership rights. BlackRock emerged during the 1980s through a different path, but with similar results. Founded by Larry Fink, BlackRock initially focused on fixed income investing and risk management technology, developing sophisticated computer models for bond trading and portfolio analysis. BlackRock's technological capabilities attracted institutional investors who needed sophisticated risk management for large portfolios, enabling the company to manage assets for pension funds, insurance companies, and governments that required professional portfolio management. The key breakthrough came when BlackRock expanded from bonds into equity index funds, applying their technological capabilities to create massive index funds that could efficiently manage enormous asset pools while maintaining minimal operating costs. BlackRock's scale advantages enabled them to offer index funds with even lower fees than competitors, while providing institutional quality technology and risk management that attracted both individual investors and large institutions. The combination of Vanguard's first-mover advantage and BlackRock's technological sophistication created a duopoly in index fund investing that gradually absorbed assets from actively managed funds, traditional investment strategies, and direct stock ownership. As index funds grew, they created self-reinforcing advantages. Lower fees attracted more investors, larger scale enabled even lower fees, and increased market share provided more influence over corporate decisions, creating positive feedback loops that accelerated index fund dominance. By the 2000s, BlackRock and Vanguard had achieved something unprecedented. They were the largest shareholders in most major corporations, while claiming they were passive investors who didn't influence corporate decisions. The passive designation was crucial for regulatory purposes because it exempted them from oversight requirements that applied to active investors who tried to influence corporate behavior. Index funds could accumulate unlimited ownership stakes without triggering antitrust scrutiny, but the distinction between passive and active investment became meaningless when index funds owned large enough stakes to determine corporate outcomes through shareholder voting, board representation, and informal influence over corporate management. The financial crisis of 2008 accelerated index fund dominance as investors lost confidence in active management and flocked to low-cost index funds that promised market returns without manager risk or style drift that could underperform during volatile markets. Post-crisis regulations also favored large institutional managers like BlackRock and Vanguard, creating compliance costs and regulatory requirements that were easier for large firms to manage than smaller competitors, further consolidating market share among the largest players. By 2020, BlackRock and Vanguard had achieved something that would have been considered impossible just decades earlier. They were the largest shareholders in 90% of S&P 500 companies, While managing combined assets exceeding $18 trillion, the transformation was complete. What had begun as a democratic innovation to help regular investors access market returns had become the greatest concentration of corporate control in history, where two firms wielded unprecedented influence over every major corporation, industry, and economic sector. Understanding how this happened requires examining each step in their rise to power and recognizing how seemingly benign financial innovations can create dangerous concentrations of economic control when scaled to manage significant portions of global wealth. Chapter 1. Quiet Revolution. The revolution that would reshape global capitalism began quietly in 1976 when John Bogle launched the first index investment trust with $11 million in assets, an amount so small it was considered a rounding error by major Wall Street firms that dismissed index investing as an academic experiment with no commercial potential. Bogle's vision seemed radical and democratizing. Instead of paying high fees to fund managers who consistently failed to beat market averages, investors could own the entire market through low-cost index funds that would automatically deliver market returns while eliminating manager risk and minimizing costs. The first index investment trust was initially mocked by Wall Street professionals who called it Bogle's folly and predicted that investors would never accept average returns when they could pursue superior performance through active management and skilled stock selection. But Bogle understood something that Wall Street missed. Most investors weren't actually getting superior returns from active management. After accounting for fees, trading costs, and taxes, actively managed funds were consistently underperforming simple market indexes while charging investors substantial fees for inferior results. Index fund mathematics were compelling. If markets were reasonably efficient, as academic research suggested, then the average actively managed fund would underperform market indexes by exactly the amount of fees charged, making low-cost index funds superior investments for most investors. Vanguard's mutual structure provided crucial advantages for index fund development. Unlike publicly traded fund companies that needed to generate profits for shareholders, Vanguard was owned by its fund shareholders, enabling the company to operate at cost while minimizing fees rather than maximizing profits. The cost advantages were substantial. While actively managed funds typically charged fees of 1 to 2% annually, Vanguard index funds charged fees as low as 0.05%, creating immediate performance advantages that compounded over time through reduced fee drag on investment returns. But few investors initially understood the implications of index fund voting structure. When investors bought shares of Vanguard index funds, they were purchasing shares of mutual funds that owned the underlying stocks, not direct ownership of the stocks themselves. This meant that Vanguard, not the individual investors, controlled voting rights for corporate decisions, shareholder resolutions, and board elections. Investors received economic benefits from stock ownership, but gave up political control over corporate governance. The voting control seemed irrelevant when Vanguard managed small amounts of assets and owned tiny percentages of individual companies. Early index funds had minimal influence over corporate decisions while providing investors with diversified market exposure at low costs. Academic research supported index fund adoption by demonstrating that markets were more efficient than previously understood, making it difficult for active managers to consistently generate superior returns after accounting for fees and transaction costs. The efficient market hypothesis provided intellectual justification for index investing, while explaining why paying for active management was typically counterproductive for long-term investors seeking maximum returns. Institutional investors began adopting index funds during the 1980s as pension funds and endowments recognized the cost advantages and performance benefits of passive investing for large asset pools that needed broad market exposure. Pension fund adoption was particularly important because institutional investors managed enormous asset pools that could benefit significantly from reduced fees while requiring broad diversification that index funds provided efficiently. The growth trajectory was initially slow but accelerating. Vanguard's assets grew from $11 million in 1976 to $100 million by 1980, $1 billion by 1985, and $10 billion by 1990, demonstrating investor acceptance of index fund principles. Each milestone validated Bogle's vision, while creating scale advantages that enabled further fee reductions and improved fund operations that attracted additional investors seeking low-cost market exposure. Competition emerged as other fund companies launched index products to compete with Vanguard's success. But Vanguard's first-mover advantage and mutual structure provided permanent cost advantages that were difficult for profit-seeking competitors to match. BlackRock entered index fund management through a different path, initially focusing on institutional fixed-income management before expanding into equity index products that leveraged their technological capabilities and institutional relationships. The combination of Vanguard's retail focus and BlackRock's institutional expertise created complementary market positions that would eventually dominate index fund management while serving different investor segments with similar passive investment strategies. Technology improvements during the 1990s enabled more efficient index fund management while reducing operational costs that could be passed to investors through lower fees and improved fund operations. Computer technology eliminated much of the manual work required for index fund management while enabling real-time portfolio monitoring and automated trading that improved index tracking while reducing management costs. 401k plan adoption accelerated index fund growth as employers sought low-cost investment options for retirement plans while employees needed diversified investment choices that didn't require sophisticated financial knowledge. Retirement plan adoption provided steady cash flows that enabled predictable growth while introducing index fund investing to millions of employees who might not otherwise have considered passive investment strategies. The dot-com bubble and subsequent crash validated index fund approaches by demonstrating the risks of active management and stock picking while showing that broad market diversification provided better risk-adjusted returns than concentrated investment strategies. Market volatility demonstrated that index funds provided downside protection through diversification while participating fully in market recoveries without manager risk or style drift that could cause underperformance during different market cycles. By 2000, Vanguard managed over $500 billion in assets while establishing index fund investing as a legitimate investment strategy rather than an academic experiment, setting the stage for explosive growth during the following decades. The foundation had been established for what would become the greatest concentration of corporate control in history, built through a financial innovation that appeared democratizing but actually concentrated unprecedented power in the hands of a few large institutional managers. The quiet revolution was gathering momentum, but its ultimate implications for market concentration and corporate control would only become apparent as index funds grew from niche investment products to dominant market forces controlling significant portions of corporate America. Index fund success created self-reinforcing growth cycles where superior performance attracted more assets, larger scale enabled lower fees, and market share growth provided increased influence over corporate decisions that would eventually reshape capitalism itself. The seemingly democratic innovation of low-cost index investing was quietly building the infrastructure for corporate control that would exceed anything achieved by traditional monopolists while maintaining the appearance of passive, arm's-length investment management. Chapter 2: Passive Power. The transformation of passive index funds into active controllers of corporate America represents one of the most successful semantic deceptions in financial history, where BlackRock and Vanguard accumulated unprecedented power by convincing regulators and investors that owning everything while voting on everything somehow constituted passive investment. The passive designation became crucial for avoiding regulatory oversight because securities laws treated passive investors differently from active investors who sought to influence corporate behavior. Passive investors could accumulate unlimited ownership stakes without triggering disclosure requirements or antitrust scrutiny. This regulatory distinction was designed for traditional mutual funds that owned small stakes in many companies without coordinating their activities or attempting to influence corporate decisions. Index funds appeared to fit this model by mechanically buying and holding all stocks in market indexes. But the distinction became meaningless when index funds grew large enough to own significant stakes in every major corporation. When BlackRock and Vanguard each own 5 to 8% of most S&P 500 companies, their collective 10 to 16% ownership often represents the largest voting bloc in shareholder meetings. Corporate voting power doesn't require majority ownership. It requires owning more shares than other investors, who might oppose management recommendations. In modern corporations with dispersed ownership, 10 to 15% voting control often determines outcomes of shareholder votes and board elections. BlackRock and Vanguard achieved something unprecedented. They became the largest shareholders in most major corporations while claiming they had no interest in influencing corporate behavior. Their passivity was purely semantic, while their influence was entirely real. The mathematical reality of concentrated ownership became unavoidable, as index funds absorbed assets from actively managed funds, individual investors, and institutional accounts that previously owned stocks directly with voting control. Each dollar flowing into index funds increased BlackRock and Vanguard's voting control over corporate America while reducing the voting power of investors who might have different preferences for corporate governance, executive compensation, or strategic direction. Proxy voting became the mechanism through which passive index funds exercised active corporate control. While individual investors gave up voting rights when buying index fund shares, BlackRock and Vanguard retained those rights and voted them according to their own policy preferences. The proxy voting process happens largely outside public scrutiny. Corporate governance decisions, executive compensation plans, environmental policies, and strategic directions are influenced by BlackRock and Vanguard votes that reflect their institutional preferences rather than the diverse views of underlying investors. Index fund managers developed sophisticated proxy voting guidelines that enabled them to influence corporate behavior systematically while maintaining the appearance of routine administrative functions rather than active corporate governance participation. BlackRock's proxy voting guidelines span hundreds of pages and cover environmental policies, executive compensation, board diversity, political spending, and strategic decisions that affect every aspect of corporate behavior. These aren't passive administrative functions, they're active corporate control. Vanguard maintains similar voting guidelines that enable systematic influence over corporate governance while claiming their voting reflects the interests of underlying investors rather than institutional policy preferences. The aggregation of voting power creates network effects where BlackRock and Vanguard can coordinate their voting to achieve shared policy objectives across multiple companies and industries, effectively creating industry-wide standards through coordinated shareholder pressure. Environmental, social, and governance (ESG) criteria became the primary vehicle for exercising coordinated influence over corporate behavior. ESG voting guidelines enable BlackRock and Vanguard to pressure companies toward specific environmental policies, social positions, and governance structures. Climate change policies provide clear examples of coordinated influence. BlackRock and Vanguard have used their voting power to pressure oil companies toward renewable energy investment, force banks to restrict fossil fuel lending, and require disclosure of climate risks across industries. These voting decisions affect corporate strategy, capital allocation, and long-term profitability based on BlackRock and Vanguard policy preferences rather than market forces or shareholder value maximization that would traditionally guide corporate decision-making. Board elections provide another mechanism for corporate control. BlackRock and Vanguard voting can determine board composition, ensuring that directors who support their policy preferences are elected while opposing candidates who might resist their influence. Executive compensation voting enables influence over CEO pay packages, equity incentive structures, and performance metrics that affect corporate leadership behavior and strategic priorities. Compensation votes directly influence executive decision-making and corporate culture. The coordination between BlackRock and Vanguard creates multiplicative effects where their combined voting power often determines outcomes, while individual decisions by either firm might be insufficient to control corporate decisions. Stewardship teams at both firms engage directly with corporate management through private meetings that aren't subject to public disclosure, enabling informal influence over corporate decisions that supplements formal voting power. These stewardship meetings provide opportunities for BlackRock and Vanguard representatives to communicate policy preferences, suggest strategic directions, and influence corporate decisions through direct engagement with CEOs and board members. The private nature of stewardship activities means that most corporate influence happens outside public scrutiny, making it difficult for investors, regulators, or researchers to assess the extent of BlackRock and Vanguard influence over corporate behavior. Industry concentration creates additional influence opportunities as BlackRock and Vanguard ownership stakes enable them to coordinate policies across competing companies within industries, potentially facilitating coordination that would be illegal if conducted directly by corporations. Banking industry voting provides examples of cross-company coordination where BlackRock and Vanguard can influence lending standards, interest rate policies, and competitive practices across multiple banks through coordinated voting on industry-wide issues. Technology industry voting enables coordination of privacy policies, content moderation standards, and competitive practices across platforms that might otherwise compete aggressively on these dimensions. The scope of influence extends beyond individual companies to industry-wide standards, regulatory compliance, and political positions that affect entire sectors of the economy through coordinated voting across portfolio companies. Market concentration creates systemic risks where BlackRock and Vanguard policy preferences affect entire industries simultaneously, potentially reducing competition, innovation, and market efficiency through coordinated influence over competing companies. The passive investor designation protects these activities from antitrust scrutiny while enabling unprecedented corporate control that exceeds anything achieved by traditional monopolists who controlled individual industries rather than cross-industry coordination. Academic research has begun documenting the effects of index fund ownership on corporate behavior, finding evidence of reduced competition, coordinated pricing, and strategic coordination that suggests active influence despite passive investor claims. Financial economists are discovering that industries with higher index fund ownership exhibit characteristics consistent with coordinated behavior among competing firms, suggesting that passive ownership enables active coordination of competitive strategies. The transformation from passive investment to active control represents a fundamental change in how capitalism operates, where market competition is replaced by coordinated influence from financial intermediaries who control competing companies simultaneously. Understanding the mechanisms of passive power reveals how financial innovation can create dangerous concentrations of economic control while maintaining the appearance of market-driven investment management and competitive corporate governance. Chapter 3: Corporate Capture. The systematic acquisition of controlling stakes in every major corporation represents the most comprehensive corporate capture in business history, where BlackRock and Vanguard achieved influence over entire industries while avoiding the regulatory scrutiny that would accompany traditional monopolization strategies. The capture strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to control individual companies through majority ownership, accumulate significant minority stakes in all competing companies within industries, enabling coordination of competitive strategies while maintaining the appearance of market competition. This approach avoided antitrust enforcement because securities laws don't restrict passive investors from owning stakes in competing companies, even when those stakes are large enough to influence corporate behavior and strategic coordination between supposed competitors. The mathematics of corporate control don't require majority ownership. In modern corporations with dispersed shareholding, 5 to 10% ownership often represents the largest voting bloc, particularly when combined with other institutional investors who typically vote with management recommendations. BlackRock and Vanguard each own 5 to 8% of most S&P 500 companies, but their combined 10–16% ownership often exceeds the holdings of any other investors, giving them decisive influence over shareholder votes and corporate governance decisions. Corporate governance structures amplify the influence of large shareholders through cumulative voting, board representation, and informal influence over management that extends far beyond formal voting power. The airline industry provides a clear example of corporate capture in action. BlackRock and Vanguard are among the top 3 shareholders in American, Delta, United, and Southwest Airlines, giving them influence over competitive strategies across the entire domestic airline industry. Airline industry concentration has increased dramatically over the past 2 decades, with 4 major carriers controlling over 80% of domestic air travel. BlackRock and Vanguard ownership stakes enable coordination of pricing, route planning, and service levels across these supposedly competing airlines. Academic research has documented reduced competition in airline markets with higher index fund ownership, finding evidence of coordinated pricing and reduced service quality that suggests systematic coordination among airlines that share common ownership structures. Banking industry capture demonstrates similar patterns, where BlackRock and Vanguard are major shareholders in JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup, enabling coordination of lending standards, interest rate policies, and competitive practices across the banking sector. Banking industry coordination affects mortgage lending, small business credit, and consumer banking services through synchronized policies that reduce competitive pressure while maintaining the appearance of independent bank operations. Credit card industry concentration provides another example where BlackRock and Vanguard ownership, stakes in Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover enable coordination of processing fees, merchant services, and consumer credit policies across the payment processing industry. Technology industry capture encompasses Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta, enabling coordination of privacy policies, content moderation standards, competitive practices, and regulatory strategies across platforms that control digital commerce and communication. Technology platform coordination affects competition in cloud computing, digital advertising, e-commerce, and social media through synchronized policies that reduce competitive pressure while maintaining the appearance of dynamic technological innovation and market competition. Pharmaceutical industry ownership includes stakes in Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and AbbVie, enabling coordination of drug pricing, research priorities, and regulatory strategies across companies that supposedly compete for market share. Healthcare industry coordination affects prescription drug costs, insurance coverage, and medical device pricing through synchronized strategies that reduce competitive pressure while maintaining the appearance of innovative pharmaceutical development and market competition. Energy industry capture includes ownership stakes in ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and other oil companies, enabling coordination of production levels, pricing strategies, and environmental policies across the energy sector. Energy industry coordination affects gasoline prices, drilling activity, and climate policies through synchronized corporate strategies that reduce competitive pressure while maintaining the appearance of independent energy company operations. Retail industry ownership encompasses Walmart, Amazon, Target, and other major retailers, enabling coordination of pricing strategies, supplier relationships, and employment practices across companies that supposedly compete for consumer spending. Retail industry coordination affects consumer prices, supply chain management, and employment conditions through synchronized corporate policies that reduce competitive pressure while maintaining the appearance of dynamic retail market competition. Media industry capture includes ownership stakes in Comcast, Disney, Warner Bros. Discovery, and other entertainment companies, enabling coordination of content policies, political messaging, and competitive strategies across media platforms. Media industry coordination affects news coverage, entertainment content, and political messaging through synchronized editorial policies that reduce competitive diversity while maintaining the appearance of independent media company operations. Agricultural industry ownership includes stakes in major food producers, agricultural equipment manufacturers, and commodity trading companies, enabling coordination of food pricing, supply chain management, and agricultural policies. Agricultural coordination affects food prices, farming practices, and agricultural policy through synchronized corporate strategies that influence food production and distribution while maintaining the appearance of competitive agricultural markets. Defense industry capture includes ownership stakes in Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and other defense contractors, enabling coordination of pricing strategies, technological development, and political lobbying across companies that supposedly compete for government contracts. Defense industry coordination affects military procurement costs, technological innovation, and foreign policy through synchronized corporate strategies that influence government spending while maintaining the appearance of competitive defense contracting. The cross-industry nature of BlackRock and Vanguard ownership creates additional coordination opportunities where policy preferences can be implemented across multiple industries simultaneously, amplifying their influence over economic policy and regulatory strategies. Environmental policies provide examples of cross-industry coordination where BlackRock and Vanguard can pressure oil companies, banks, utilities, and manufacturers towards synchronized climate strategies that reshape entire economic sectors. Employment practices represent another area of cross-industry coordination where BlackRock and Vanguard voting can influence wage policies, working conditions, and labor relations across industries through synchronized human resources strategies. Political spending coordination enables synchronized lobbying strategies across industries where BlackRock and Vanguard portfolio companies can coordinate their political activities to influence regulatory policies and legislative priorities. The systematic nature of corporate capture means that BlackRock and Vanguard influence affects virtually every aspect of corporate America while avoiding regulatory oversight because their influence operates through legitimate shareholding rather than illegal monopolization strategies. Regulatory agencies have been slow to recognize the competitive implications of index fund ownership because traditional antitrust enforcement focuses on horizontal mergers and vertical integration rather than passive ownership of competing companies. Academic economists are beginning to document the competitive effects of common ownership, finding evidence of reduced innovation, higher prices, and coordinated strategic behavior in industries with high levels of index fund ownership. The Federal Trade Commission and Department of Justice have begun investigating whether common ownership constitutes antitrust violations, but enforcement remains limited because index fund ownership operates through legitimate financial markets rather than direct corporate control. European regulators have expressed greater concern about index fund concentration, with some policymakers calling for ownership limits or voting restrictions that would limit the ability of index funds to influence corporate behavior across competing companies. The corporate capture represents a fundamental transformation of capitalism, where market competition is replaced by coordinated influence from financial intermediaries who own stakes in all competing companies while claiming to be passive investors. Understanding the scope and mechanisms of corporate capture reveals how index fund growth has created dangerous concentrations of economic power that operate outside traditional regulatory frameworks while maintaining the appearance of competitive market capitalism. Chapter 4. Shadow Voting. The proxy voting system that enables BlackRock and Vanguard to control corporate America operates almost entirely in the shadows, where decisions affecting millions of workers, consumers, and investors are made by unelected fund managers who face no democratic accountability for their use of enormous voting power. Proxy voting represents the mechanism through which share ownership translates into corporate control. When investors buy shares, they receive voting rights that enable participation in corporate governance through shareholder meetings, board elections, and policy resolutions that determine corporate direction. But when investors buy index fund shares instead of individual stocks, they transfer their voting rights to fund managers who vote the shares according to their own institutional preferences rather than the diverse views of underlying investors who provided the capital. This transfer of voting control happens automatically and irreversibly. Index fund investors cannot recover their voting rights, direct how their shares are voted, or opt out of proxy voting decisions they disagree with. They have permanently surrendered democratic participation in corporate governance. BlackRock and Vanguard proxy voting departments wield more corporate influence than any individuals in history, while operating with minimal public oversight and no democratic accountability. Their voting decisions affect corporate strategy, executive compensation, environmental policy, and political activities across the entire economy. The scale of voting power is unprecedented. BlackRock votes approximately $10 trillion worth of shares across thousands of companies, while Vanguard votes another $8 trillion. Together, they cast more shareholder votes than any other entities in corporate history. BlackRock's investment stewardship team consists of fewer than 50 people who make proxy voting decisions affecting trillions of dollars in shareholder value across industries that employ millions of people and serve hundreds of millions of customers. These decisions are made through internal processes that aren't subject to public input, democratic oversight, or meaningful appeal procedures. Corporate governance affecting entire industries is determined by small teams of unelected professionals following internal guidelines. Proxy voting guidelines provide the policy framework for systematic corporate influence. BlackRock's voting guidelines span hundreds of pages covering environmental policies, board diversity, executive compensation, political spending, and strategic decisions. Environmental voting guidelines enable BlackRock to pressure companies towards specific climate policies, regardless of shareholder preferences or economic efficiency. Oil companies are pressured to invest in renewable energy, banks are pushed to restrict fossil fuel lending, and manufacturers face demands for carbon reduction. Board diversity requirements impose demographic mandates on corporate governance regardless of shareholder preferences for merit-based selection or concerns about qualified candidate availability in specific industries or regions. Executive compensation voting enables direct influence over CEO pay packages, equity incentive structures, and performance metrics that affect corporate leadership behavior across industries. Compensation decisions directly influence corporate culture and strategic priorities. Political spending oversight enables influence over corporate political activities, lobbying expenditures, and trade association memberships that affect corporate influence over regulatory policy and legislative priorities. The coordination of voting across portfolio companies creates multiplicative effects where BlackRock and Vanguard can implement industry-wide policies through synchronized voting across competing companies that would face antitrust prosecution if coordinated directly. Stewardship engagement supplements formal voting through private meetings with corporate executives that enable informal influence over corporate decisions outside the proxy voting process. These meetings aren't subject to public disclosure requirements. BlackRock conducts thousands of stewardship meetings annually with corporate executives to discuss governance issues, strategic priorities, and policy preferences. These meetings provide opportunities for direct influence over corporate decision-making beyond formal shareholder votes. Vanguard maintains similar engagement programs that enable private influence over corporate decisions through regular meetings with management teams across their portfolio companies. These meetings operate outside public scrutiny while affecting corporate strategy. The private nature of stewardship activities means that most corporate influence happens through confidential communications that aren't subject to disclosure requirements, making it impossible for investors or researchers to assess the extent of index fund influence. Voting coordination between BlackRock and Vanguard amplifies their individual influence when they vote together on corporate governance issues. Their combined voting power often determines outcomes of shareholder resolutions and board elections. Industry-specific coordination enables systematic influence over competitive practices within sectors where BlackRock and Vanguard can pressure all major companies towards synchronized policies that reduce competition while maintaining the appearance of independent corporate decisions. Banking industry coordination affects lending standards, interest rate policies, and regulatory compliance across major banks through synchronized voting that influences competitive practices and risk management policies. Technology platform coordination influences privacy policies, content moderation standards, and competitive practices across social media companies and cloud computing platforms through synchronized governance pressure. Healthcare industry coordination affects drug pricing, insurance coverage, and medical device policies through synchronized pressure across pharmaceutical companies, health insurers, and medical equipment manufacturers. Energy industry coordination influences production levels, environmental policies, and regulatory strategies across oil companies through synchronized voting that affects industry-wide practices and climate policies. The systematic nature of coordinated voting means that BlackRock and Vanguard can implement policy preferences across entire industries while maintaining plausible deniability about coordinated influence over competitive practices. Shareholder resolution voting provides additional mechanisms for policy influence, where BlackRock and Vanguard can support or oppose specific policy proposals affecting corporate governance, environmental practices, or social policies. Environmental shareholder resolutions enable pressure for specific climate policies, carbon reduction targets, and renewable energy investment across industries through coordinated voting support for activist investor proposals. Social policy resolutions affect corporate positions on political issues, employment practices, and community relations through voting that influences corporate social responsibility policies and public advocacy positions. Governance resolutions affect board composition, executive compensation, and corporate structure through voting that influences management accountability and shareholder rights across portfolio companies. The cumulative effect of systematic proxy voting is the transformation of corporate governance from shareholder democracy into technocratic control by unelected fund managers who face no accountability for their use of enormous voting power. Regulatory oversight of proxy voting is minimal because securities laws treat voting as routine administrative functions rather than exercises of corporate control that might warrant antitrust scrutiny or democratic accountability requirements. The Securities and Exchange Commission requires disclosure of voting policies, but not detailed explanations of individual voting decisions or assessment of cumulative influence over corporate behavior across industries. Academic research is beginning to document the effects of index fund voting on corporate behavior, finding evidence of systematic influence over executive compensation, environmental policies, and competitive practices that suggests active control rather than passive investment. Institutional investors who might oppose BlackRock and Vanguard policy preferences often lack sufficient voting power to influence outcomes because index fund shareholding concentrates voting control in the hands of firms that vote consistently according to their policy guidelines. Individual investors who disagree with index fund voting decisions have no recourse because they surrendered their voting rights when purchasing index fund shares and cannot recover those rights without selling their investments. The shadow voting system represents a fundamental transformation of corporate governance, where democratic shareholder control has been replaced by technocratic influence exercised by unelected fund managers who face no meaningful accountability for their exercise of unprecedented corporate power. Understanding how shadow voting operates reveals the mechanisms through which index fund ownership has created the most comprehensive corporate control system in business history, while maintaining the appearance of routine investment management rather than systematic corporate capture. Chapter 5. Government influence. The revolving door between BlackRock and government agencies has created unprecedented private influence over public policy, where former BlackRock executives write the regulations they previously sought to avoid, while current officials design policies that benefit their future employer's business model. This revolving door operates at the highest levels of government, including Federal Reserve officials, Treasury Department leadership, Securities and Exchange Commission regulators, and White House economic advisors who move seamlessly between BlackRock executive positions and government policy roles. Brian Dees exemplifies this pattern, serving as BlackRock's global head of sustainable investing before becoming President Biden's National Economic Council director, where he oversees economic policy that directly affects BlackRock's business interests in climate finance and ESG investing. Dees' transition from BlackRock executive to White House economic advisor enables him to implement government policies that align with BlackRock's business strategy while claiming to serve the public interest rather than his former employer's commercial objectives. Larry Fink, BlackRock's CEO, maintains informal advisory relationships with government officials across multiple administrations, while BlackRock receives government contracts and regulatory treatment that benefits the firm's business model and competitive position. The Federal Reserve's relationship with BlackRock demonstrates the most direct government influence, where BlackRock received no-bid contracts to manage emergency lending facilities during the 2008 financial crisis and COVID-19 pandemic responses. BlackRock's Federal Reserve contracts generated hundreds of millions in fee income while providing the firm with unprecedented access to government officials and inside information about monetary policy decisions that affect financial markets. The 2008 crisis contracts established BlackRock as the government's go-to crisis manager, creating institutional relationships that continue providing business opportunities and policy influence across multiple government agencies and economic cycles. COVID-19 pandemic response created additional opportunities for BlackRock government contracts, including management of corporate bond purchase programs that generated substantial fees while giving BlackRock influence over which companies received government support. The pandemic contracts reinforced BlackRock's position as essential infrastructure for government crisis response, while creating potential conflicts of interest where BlackRock manages government programs that affect their portfolio companies and business interests. Treasury Department relationships provide BlackRock with influence over financial regulatory policy through formal advisory roles and informal consultation that affects securities regulation, banking oversight, and monetary policy coordination. Securities and Exchange Commission relationships enable BlackRock to influence regulatory policies affecting asset management, proxy voting oversight, and index fund regulation through former employees who maintain relationships with current colleagues. The regulatory capture extends beyond individual relationships to institutional arrangements where government agencies rely on BlackRock expertise and analysis for policy development, creating dependency relationships that benefit BlackRock's business interests. Financial stability oversight provides BlackRock with influence over systemic risk regulation and crisis management policies through advisory roles with the Financial Stability Oversight Council and other regulatory bodies that monitor financial system risks. International financial relationships enable BlackRock to influence global financial regulatory coordination through participation in international monetary policy discussions and central bank policy development that affects global financial markets. Government pension fund management provides BlackRock with additional revenue streams while creating dependency relationships with government agencies that rely on BlackRock investment management for retirement system funding. State and local government relationships expand BlackRock's public sector influence through pension fund management contracts and municipal bond underwriting that generates revenue while creating political relationships across multiple levels of government. Academic relationships supplement government influence through funding for economic research and policy analysis that supports BlackRock's policy preferences while providing intellectual credibility for government officials who implement similar policies. Think tank funding enables BlackRock to influence policy development through research institutions that provide analysis supporting BlackRock's business model while offering career opportunities for government officials who support favorable policies. Media relationships help shape public perception of BlackRock's government roles while minimizing scrutiny of potential conflicts of interest and regulatory capture that might generate political opposition to BlackRock's government influence. The cumulative effect of government relationships is the creation of policy environments that benefit BlackRock's business model while eliminating regulatory obstacles that might limit the firm's growth or operational flexibility. Climate policy represents a clear example of aligned interests, where BlackRock's ESG investing strategy benefits from government policies promoting renewable energy, carbon pricing, and environmental regulation that creates demand for BlackRock's climate-focused investment products. Financial regulation benefits BlackRock through policies that favor large institutional managers over smaller competitors while creating compliance costs and regulatory requirements that are easier for large firms to manage. Monetary policy coordination provides BlackRock with advanced insights into Federal Reserve decisions, while enabling the firm to influence policy discussions through former employees who maintain relationships with current officials. Crisis management policies ensure that BlackRock receives government contracts during financial emergencies, while positioning the firm as essential infrastructure for government crisis response across multiple economic sectors. International coordination enables BlackRock to influence global financial regulatory policies through participation in international monetary policy discussions and regulatory coordination that affects competitive conditions across multiple markets. The systemic nature of government influence means that BlackRock benefits from policy coordination across multiple agencies and regulatory bodies while maintaining the appearance of providing neutral expertise rather than advocating for specific business interests. Academic economists have begun documenting the extent of regulatory capture in financial services, finding evidence of systematic influence over policy development that benefits large institutional managers at the expense of competition and market efficiency. Government oversight of BlackRock's conflicts of interest remains limited because regulatory agencies often lack the expertise and resources necessary to monitor complex relationships between large financial institutions and government policy development. Congressional oversight faces limitations because lawmakers often lack technical expertise in financial markets, while BlackRock's government relationships provide the firm with advance warning of potential regulatory challenges and political opposition. International regulatory coordination creates additional oversight challenges because BlackRock's global operations enable the firm to shift activities between jurisdictions while maintaining influence over regulatory policies across multiple countries. The transformation of government-private sector relationships represents a fundamental change in how democratic governance operates, where policy development is influenced by private interests that may conflict with public welfare while maintaining the appearance of neutral expertise. Understanding the mechanisms of government influence reveals how large financial institutions can capture regulatory agencies while maintaining competitive advantages that benefit private interests at the expense of market competition and democratic accountability. The government influence represents a systematic challenge to democratic governance, where private financial power can influence public policy through institutional relationships that operate outside democratic oversight while affecting policies that impact millions of citizens. Chapter 6. Market Manipulation. The systematic manipulation of financial markets by BlackRock and Vanguard operates through mechanisms that would be illegal for individual investors but remain permissible for index funds because their massive scale enables them to move markets simply through routine investment operations. Market manipulation traditionally involves deliberate attempts to influence security prices through deceptive practices, but index fund operations achieve similar effects through legitimate investment activities that move markets based on fund flows rather than underlying economic fundamentals. Index fund rebalancing creates artificial demand for securities that must be purchased regardless of price or valuation considerations. When stocks are added to major indexes like the S&P 500, index funds must purchase them automatically, creating price increases unrelated to corporate performance. The index effect demonstrates systematic market manipulation where stock prices increase by 3–7% simply from S&P 500 inclusion, providing windfall gains to existing shareholders while forcing index fund investors to purchase overvalued securities. Tesla's S&P 500 addition in December 2020 required index funds to purchase approximately $80 billion worth of Tesla shares, regardless of valuation concerns, creating artificial demand that drove the stock price higher while forcing passive investors to buy at inflated prices. The systematic nature of index inclusion effects means that index fund investors consistently purchase securities at artificially inflated prices while providing windfall profits to active investors who can time their trades around predictable index fund purchases. BlackRock and Vanguard's combined purchasing power creates market impacts that exceed those of any other institutional investors because their massive scale means that routine fund flows can move individual stock prices and entire market sectors. Exchange-traded fund, ETF creation and redemption mechanisms provide additional market manipulation opportunities where authorized participants can exploit price discrepancies between ETF shares and underlying securities through arbitrage transactions. ETF arbitrage enables sophisticated investors to profit from price differences created by index fund operations while imposing costs on passive investors who don't understand the mechanics of ETF pricing and market impact. Sector rotation strategies enable BlackRock and Vanguard to influence entire industries through coordinated investment flows that create artificial demand for favored sectors while reducing demand for disfavored industries. ESG investing provides a mechanism for systematic market manipulation where BlackRock and Vanguard can drive capital toward preferred companies and industries while restricting capital flows to disfavored sectors based on environmental and social criteria. Climate investing demonstrates coordinated market manipulation, where BlackRock and Vanguard direct capital flows away from fossil fuel companies toward renewable energy investments, artificially affecting relative valuations based on policy preferences rather than economic fundamentals. The scale of ESG fund flows enables BlackRock and Vanguard to systematically underfund traditional energy companies while overfunding renewable energy companies, creating artificial price effects that don't reflect underlying business fundamentals or market demand. Bond market manipulation operates through similar mechanisms where BlackRock's fixed income operations can influence interest rates, credit spreads, and government bond prices through massive trading volumes that move markets based on fund flows. Government bond markets are particularly susceptible to BlackRock manipulation because the firm manages enormous bond portfolios for institutional clients while maintaining advisory relationships with government agencies that issue the bonds. Municipal bond markets face similar manipulation risks, where BlackRock's municipal bond funds can influence local government borrowing costs through coordinated investment strategies that affect market pricing for state and local government debt. Corporate bond manipulation affects individual companies' borrowing costs through BlackRock's investment decisions that can influence credit spreads and debt market access for portfolio companies based on internal policy preferences. Currency manipulation becomes possible through BlackRock's international operations, where massive capital flows between countries can influence exchange rates based on portfolio allocation decisions rather than underlying economic fundamentals. International fund flows enable BlackRock to affect currency valuations through investment decisions that move capital between countries while influencing exchange rates that affect international trade and economic relationships. Commodity market influence operates through BlackRock's commodity funds and ETFs that can affect prices for oil, metals, and agricultural products through investment flows that create artificial demand based on financial rather than commercial considerations. Real estate market manipulation occurs through BlackRock's property investments and REITs that can influence real estate prices in specific markets through coordinated investment strategies that affect local property valuations. Technology sector manipulation demonstrates how coordinated index fund investment can systematically favor large technology companies over smaller competitors through investment flows that enhance the competitive advantages of already dominant platforms. The network effects of technology manipulation mean that BlackRock and Vanguard investment flows can reinforce market concentration by providing additional capital to dominant companies while restricting capital access for potential competitors. Healthcare sector manipulation affects pharmaceutical company valuations through coordinated investment flows that can influence drug development priorities and healthcare industry consolidation through systematic capital allocation decisions. Energy sector manipulation demonstrates coordinated efforts to redirect capital flows away from traditional energy companies toward renewable energy investments through systematic underweighting of fossil fuel companies in ESG-focused funds. Financial sector manipulation affects bank valuations and lending practices through BlackRock and Vanguard's ownership stakes and investment flows that can influence banking industry consolidation and competitive practices. The systematic nature of market manipulation means that BlackRock and Vanguard can influence relative valuations across industries while maintaining the appearance of passive investment management rather than active market manipulation. Regulatory oversight of market manipulation focuses on individual securities and traditional pump-and-dump schemes, while ignoring systematic manipulation through index fund operations that achieve similar market impact through different mechanisms. Academic research is beginning to document the market impact of index fund operations, finding evidence of systematic price effects that suggest market manipulation through legitimate investment activities rather than illegal trading practices. Market efficiency theory assumes that price manipulation is temporary and will be corrected by arbitrage. But index fund manipulation can be permanent because passive investors continue purchasing overvalued securities regardless of price considerations. The concentration of assets under management means that BlackRock and Vanguard market manipulation affects broader economic relationships through artificial price signals that misallocate capital across industries and companies. International coordination of market manipulation enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence global capital flows while affecting exchange rates, commodity prices, and international investment patterns through coordinated portfolio allocation decisions. Understanding the mechanisms of market manipulation reveals how index fund growth has created systematic distortions in financial markets while enabling unprecedented influence over capital allocation and relative valuations across the global economy. The market manipulation represents a fundamental challenge to market efficiency and price discovery, while demonstrating how large institutional investors can achieve market influence that exceeds traditional concepts of illegal manipulation through legitimate investment operations. Chapter 7. ESG Control. Environmental, social, and governance, des ESG criteria, have become the primary weapon through which BlackRock and Vanguard exercise coordinated control over corporate behavior, enabling them to implement their policy preferences across entire industries while claiming to respond to investor demand for sustainable investing. ESG investing provides the perfect mechanism for corporate control because it appears socially responsible while enabling systematic pressure on companies to adopt policies that align with BlackRock and Vanguard preferences rather than maximizing shareholder value or responding to market forces. The transformation of ESG from niche investment strategy to dominant corporate influence tool demonstrates how BlackRock and Vanguard can reshape capitalism itself through coordinated pressure that transcends traditional market mechanisms and democratic governance. Climate change policies represent the most visible example of ESG control, where BlackRock and Vanguard use their ownership stakes to pressure fossil fuel companies toward renewable energy investment regardless of economic efficiency or shareholder returns. ExxonMobil's board election in 2021 demonstrated coordinated ESG pressure, where BlackRock and Vanguard voting enabled activist investors to elect 3 board members committed to transitioning the company away from oil production toward renewable energy investment. The ExxonMobil board election represented a fundamental challenge to shareholder primacy, where investor groups used coordinated voting to force strategic changes that prioritized environmental objectives over profit maximization and traditional shareholder value. Similar pressure has been applied to Chevron, Shell, BP, and other oil companies through coordinated voting that forces management to justify traditional energy investment while increasing spending on renewable energy projects that may not generate superior returns. Banking industry ESG pressure has forced major banks to restrict lending to coal companies, pipeline projects, and other fossil fuel infrastructure through coordinated shareholder pressure that affects credit allocation across the energy sector. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo have all announced restrictions on fossil fuel lending following ESG pressure from BlackRock and Vanguard voting that threatened management support if banks didn't adopt climate-friendly lending policies. Utility company ESG pressure has forced electric utilities to accelerate coal plant closures and increase renewable energy investment through coordinated voting that affects energy policy and electricity pricing for millions of consumers. Technology company ESG pressure affects content moderation, privacy policies, and political bias through coordinated voting that influences how social media platforms and search engines manage information, and political discourse. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and other platforms have implemented content policies that align with ESG preferences following coordinated pressure from BlackRock and Vanguard, voting that threatened management support for alternative approaches. Healthcare industry ESG pressure affects drug pricing, research priorities, and access policies through coordinated voting that influences pharmaceutical company strategies and medical device development priorities. Pharmaceutical companies have modified drug pricing strategies and increased research into diseases affecting underserved populations following ESG pressure that threaten shareholder support for profit-maximizing strategies. Manufacturing industry ESG pressure affects supply chain policies, labor practices, and environmental compliance through coordinated voting that influences production strategies and operational priorities across industrial companies. Major manufacturers have implemented supply chain monitoring and labor standards that align with ESG preferences following coordinated pressure that made continued management support conditional on adopting preferred policies. Retail industry ESG pressure affects employment practices, supplier relationships, and community engagement through coordinated voting that influences how major retailers manage their workforce and supply chain relationships. Walmart, Amazon, and other major retailers have modified employment practices and supplier requirements following ESG pressure that threatened management support for alternative approaches to labor relations and supply chain management. The coordination of ESG pressure across industries creates multiplicative effects where BlackRock and Vanguard can implement policy preferences that affect entire economic sectors through synchronized pressure on competing companies. Carbon emissions reduction targets demonstrate industry-wide coordination, where BlackRock and Vanguard pressure has forced companies across multiple industries to adopt similar climate goals regardless of industry-specific economic considerations. Board diversity requirements impose demographic mandates across industries through coordinated voting that prioritizes representation over qualifications while affecting corporate governance across all major companies. Executive compensation limits affect management accountability across industries through coordinated voting that influences pay structures and performance metrics regardless of company-specific circumstances or competitive requirements. Political spending restrictions affect corporate political activities across industries through coordinated voting that limits company participation in political processes while enhancing BlackRock and Vanguard political influence. Supply chain monitoring requirements affect international trade relationships through coordinated pressure that influences how companies manage global supply chains while affecting international business relationships. ESG fund marketing creates artificial demand for sustainable investing while providing BlackRock and Vanguard with additional assets under management and increased influence over corporate behavior through dedicated ESG investment products. Greenwashing concerns arise when companies modify their marketing and reporting rather than their fundamental business practices to attract ESG investment while avoiding meaningful changes that might affect profitability. ESG rating agencies provide additional control mechanisms where third-party organizations rate company ESG performance using criteria that align with BlackRock and Vanguard preferences while affecting capital allocation and investment flows. The proliferation of ESG metrics creates measurement and reporting requirements that impose compliance costs on companies while providing BlackRock and Vanguard with additional tools for monitoring and influencing corporate behavior. Regulatory support for ESG investing provides government endorsement for private policy preferences, while creating additional pressure on companies to adopt ESG-compliant policies, regardless of shareholder value or economic efficiency considerations. International ESG coordination enables BlackRock and Vanguard to implement policy preferences globally through synchronized pressure on multinational companies while affecting international business practices and regulatory policies. European ESG regulations provide additional tools for corporate control, where BlackRock and Vanguard can leverage regulatory requirements to pressure companies toward policy compliance while maintaining the appearance of regulatory compliance rather than private control. Academic research on ESG investing has found mixed evidence of superior financial performance while documenting increased compliance costs and regulatory complexity that may reduce overall economic efficiency. The transformation of ESG from investment strategy to corporate control mechanism represents a fundamental challenge to market capitalism, where private policy preferences can be implemented across entire industries through coordinated shareholder pressure. Understanding ESG control reveals how BlackRock and Vanguard use apparently benign investment criteria to exercise systematic influence over corporate behavior, while implementing their policy preferences across the global economy through coordinated shareholder activism disguised as sustainable investing. Chapter 8. Global Dominance. The international expansion of BlackRock and Vanguard has created the first truly global financial empire, where two American firms exercise unprecedented influence over economic policies, corporate governance, and capital allocation across every major economy, while operating largely outside the oversight of any single democratic government. BlackRock's global operations span 38 countries with $10.6 trillion in assets under management, making it larger than the GDP of any country except the United States and China. This scale provides influence over national economic policies and international financial relationships that exceeds that of most sovereign governments. Vanguard's international presence encompasses 30 countries with $8.1 trillion in assets, creating combined global influence that affects economic policies and corporate behavior across virtually every developed and emerging market economy worldwide. European expansion demonstrates how BlackRock and Vanguard leverage their American market dominance to capture overseas markets while exporting their corporate control model to countries with different regulatory frameworks and political systems. The United Kingdom provides BlackRock and Vanguard with their largest European base, where they are among the largest shareholders in FTSE 100 companies, while influencing British corporate governance through voting power that affects business strategy and political positions. BlackRock's influence over British pension funds and insurance companies extends their control over retirement savings for millions of British workers, while affecting domestic investment flows and economic policy through portfolio allocation decisions. German market penetration enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence DAX companies and German corporate governance, while affecting European Union economic policies through their ownership stakes in companies that shape EU political and economic decisions. French market operations provide influence over CAC 40 companies and French corporate behavior, while affecting European financial regulation through relationships with French financial institutions and government officials who rely on BlackRock expertise. Italian, Spanish, and Dutch market presence extends BlackRock and Vanguard influence throughout Europe, while affecting European central bank policies and EU regulatory frameworks through their ownership stakes in major European financial institutions. European pension fund management provides BlackRock with additional revenue streams, while creating dependency relationships with European governments that rely on BlackRock investment management for public retirement system funding. Asian expansion demonstrates how BlackRock and Vanguard export their American dominance model to rapidly growing economies, where they can capture increasing wealth while influencing economic development and corporate governance. Japanese market operations enable BlackRock and Vanguard to influence Nikkei companies and Japanese corporate behavior, while affecting Bank of Japan policies through their ownership stakes in Japanese financial institutions and relationships with Japanese government officials. Chinese market expansion provides BlackRock with access to the world's second-largest economy, while creating potential conflicts between American corporate control and Chinese regulatory oversight of foreign financial institution influence. Hong Kong operations serve as a gateway for broader Asian expansion, while providing BlackRock and Vanguard with influence over Asian financial markets through their ownership stakes in regional banks and financial institutions. Singapore and Australian markets provide additional Asian influence, while enabling BlackRock and Vanguard to affect regional economic policies through their ownership stakes in major companies and financial institutions. Indian market development creates opportunities for BlackRock and Vanguard to influence the world's most populous democracy while affecting economic policies and corporate governance in one of the world's fastest-growing major economies. Emerging market expansion enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence developing countries' economic policies while capturing increasing wealth from economic growth in Africa, Latin America, and other developing regions. Brazilian operations provide Latin American influence while enabling BlackRock and Vanguard to affect regional economic policies through their ownership stakes in major Brazilian companies and financial institutions. Mexican market presence extends North American influence while providing BlackRock and Vanguard with additional emerging market exposure and influence over regional economic development and trade policies. South African operations provide entry into African markets while enabling BlackRock and Vanguard to influence economic policies and corporate governance across the African continent through their ownership stakes in regional companies. International regulatory arbitrage enables BlackRock and Vanguard to optimize their global operations while avoiding restrictive oversight through strategic positioning across multiple jurisdictions with different regulatory frameworks. European regulatory coordination affects global financial regulation through BlackRock and Vanguard influence over European financial institutions and government officials who participate in international regulatory coordination. Asian regulatory relationships provide influence over regional financial policies while enabling BlackRock and Vanguard to affect international trade and investment policies through their relationships with Asian government officials and central banks. International monetary policy coordination enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence global economic policies through their relationships with central bankers and government officials who coordinate international monetary policies. Global currency relationships provide BlackRock and Vanguard with influence over exchange rates and international trade through their massive international capital flows that can affect currency valuations and international economic relationships. International trade finance enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence global trade patterns through their ownership stakes in multinational companies and financial institutions that facilitate international commerce. Development finance operations provide BlackRock with influence over international development policies through their participation in infrastructure financing and economic development programs in emerging market countries. Climate finance coordination enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence global environmental policies through their international ESG investing strategies that affect economic development and environmental policies worldwide. Cross-border merger coordination affects international business combinations through BlackRock and Vanguard ownership stakes in companies participating in international mergers and acquisitions that reshape global industry structure. International tax optimization enables BlackRock and Vanguard to minimize their global tax obligations while maximizing profits from international operations through sophisticated tax planning across multiple jurisdictions. The systematic nature of global dominance means that BlackRock and Vanguard can influence international economic policies and corporate behavior worldwide while maintaining the appearance of providing investment management services rather than exercising coordinated global control. Democratic accountability remains limited because BlackRock and Vanguard global operations transcend any single democratic government, while their influence affects policies that impact hundreds of millions of people across multiple countries. International regulatory coordination faces challenges because BlackRock and Vanguard can shift operations between jurisdictions while maintaining influence over regulatory policies across multiple countries through their relationships with government officials. Understanding global dominance reveals how BlackRock and Vanguard have created unprecedented international influence that affects economic policies and corporate behavior worldwide, while operating largely outside the oversight of democratic governments or international regulatory coordination. Chapter 9: Hidden Networks. The interconnected web of relationships, investments, and institutional arrangements that enable BlackRock and Vanguard's control extends far beyond their direct asset management operations, creating hidden networks of influence that amplify their power through financial institutions, regulatory agencies, and corporate leadership that most people never recognize. Board interlocks create systematic coordination between BlackRock, Vanguard, and the companies they control through shared directors who serve on multiple corporate boards while coordinating policies and strategic decisions across supposedly independent companies. Former BlackRock and Vanguard executives serve on corporate boards throughout the financial services industry, creating ongoing relationships that provide influence over competitive strategies and regulatory policies affecting asset management and financial services. J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and other major banks include former BlackRock executives on their boards, creating coordination opportunities between the largest asset manager and the largest banks that control corporate lending and financial services. Technology company boards include current and former BlackRock executives who influence corporate governance and strategic decisions affecting data privacy, content moderation, and competitive practices across digital platforms and cloud computing services. Energy company board representation provides BlackRock with direct influence over strategic decisions affecting oil production, renewable energy investment, and climate policies across major energy companies, regardless of formal ownership percentages. The institutional investor network creates additional coordination mechanisms where pension funds, insurance companies, and endowments that rely on BlackRock investment management also coordinate their voting and investment decisions with BlackRock preferences. State pension systems that contract with BlackRock for investment management often adopt voting guidelines and investment strategies that align with BlackRock preferences while affecting public employee retirement systems across multiple states. University endowments managed by BlackRock create coordination with academic institutions while influencing educational policies, research priorities, and academic perspectives that support BlackRock's business model and policy preferences. Foundation investments managed by BlackRock create coordination with charitable organizations while influencing philanthropic strategies and social policies that align with BlackRock's ESG investing priorities and policy preferences. Insurance company asset management creates coordination between BlackRock and insurance companies that provide life insurance, property coverage, and financial services to millions of consumers while affecting investment policies and customer service standards. The Federal Reserve's institutional relationships with BlackRock create ongoing coordination opportunities through advisory relationships, crisis management contracts, and informal consultation that influences monetary policy and financial regulation. Federal Reserve Bank relationships provide BlackRock with access to central bank officials while creating ongoing coordination opportunities through regional Fed governance and policy development processes. International central bank relationships extend coordination opportunities globally, while enabling BlackRock to influence monetary policies and financial regulation across multiple countries through advisory relationships and crisis management contracts. Bank for International Settlements relationships provide BlackRock with influence over international monetary coordination while affecting global financial stability policies and regulatory coordination between central banks. International Monetary Fund relationships enable BlackRock to influence global economic policies while affecting development finance and crisis management policies that impact emerging market countries and international financial stability. World Bank relationships provide influence over international development policies while affecting infrastructure finance and economic development programs that create investment opportunities for BlackRock and coordination with development finance institutions. Private equity networks create additional coordination mechanisms where BlackRock's private equity operations coordinate with other major private equity firms while affecting corporate governance and strategic decisions across portfolio companies. Venture capital relationships enable coordination with technology investing while affecting startup development and technological innovation priorities that align with BlackRock's investment strategies and policy preferences. Real estate investment networks provide coordination opportunities with major real estate developers and property managers while affecting real estate development patterns and property management policies across multiple markets. Commodity trading relationships enable coordination with agricultural, energy, and mineral commodity markets while affecting pricing and supply chain policies that influence global commodity markets and international trade relationships. Academic networks create intellectual infrastructure for BlackRock's policy preferences through funding for economic research, policy analysis, and academic programs that support index fund investing and ESG investing strategies. Think tank relationships provide policy development infrastructure while enabling BlackRock to influence regulatory policies and political discussions through research institutions that provide intellectual credibility for BlackRock's policy preferences. Media relationships help shape public perception of index fund investing while minimizing scrutiny of market concentration and corporate control issues that might generate political opposition to BlackRock and Vanguard dominance. Financial media relationships provide favorable coverage of BlackRock and Vanguard operations while promoting index fund investing and ESG investing strategies that benefit BlackRock's business model. Legal services networks create coordination with major law firms while enabling BlackRock to influence regulatory interpretation and policy implementation through legal relationships that affect securities regulation and corporate governance. Accounting services coordination affects financial reporting and regulatory compliance across portfolio companies, while enabling systematic influence over corporate accounting practices and financial disclosure policies. Consulting services relationships enable BlackRock to influence corporate strategy across portfolio companies while affecting management decisions and operational policies through consulting relationships that supplement ownership influence. Professional services coordination creates systematic influence over corporate decision-making while enabling BlackRock to affect management practices, strategic planning, and operational policies across multiple industries and companies. The systematic nature of hidden networks means that BlackRock and Vanguard influence operates through multiple channels simultaneously while creating coordination opportunities that amplify their direct ownership influence through institutional relationships. Network effects create multiplicative influence, where BlackRock and Vanguard relationships with financial institutions, government agencies, and corporate leadership enable systematic coordination that exceeds their direct ownership influence over individual companies. Information sharing through hidden networks provides BlackRock and Vanguard with superior intelligence about market conditions, regulatory developments, and corporate strategies, while enabling coordinated responses to market opportunities and regulatory challenges. Policy coordination through hidden networks enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence regulatory development and political decisions while maintaining the appearance of providing neutral expertise rather than advocating for specific business interests. Understanding hidden networks reveals how BlackRock and Vanguard have created systematic influence that operates through multiple institutional relationships while amplifying their direct ownership power through coordination mechanisms that operate outside public scrutiny. The hidden networks represent a fundamental challenge to market competition and democratic governance, where coordinated influence operates through institutional relationships that enable systematic control while maintaining the appearance of independent decision-making by formally separate institutions. Chapter 10. Future Monopoly. The trajectory of BlackRock and Vanguard's growing dominance points toward an inevitable endpoint: complete corporate monopolization disguised as passive investing, where two firms will eventually own controlling stakes in every major corporation, while exercising unprecedented influence over economic policies, political decisions, and social priorities. Current growth rates suggest that BlackRock and Vanguard will manage over $30 trillion in assets by 2030, representing approximately 40% of global equity markets and unprecedented concentration of corporate ownership in the hands of two institutional managers. The mathematical progression is inexorable. As index fund investing continues growing relative to active management, more voting control flows to BlackRock and Vanguard, while individual investors and competing institutions lose influence over corporate governance and strategic decisions. Market share concentration accelerates through self-reinforcing advantages, where larger scale enables lower fees, superior performance attribution, and enhanced regulatory influence that attracts additional assets while making competition increasingly difficult for smaller firms. Technology advancement enhances BlackRock and Vanguard competitive advantages through artificial intelligence, automated portfolio management, and sophisticated risk modeling that enable superior operational efficiency while reducing costs that can be passed through to investors. Regulatory momentum favors continued index fund growth through policy preferences for passive investing, ESG compliance requirements that benefit large institutional managers, and crisis management policies that rely on BlackRock expertise for implementation. International expansion provides unlimited growth opportunities as emerging market development, demographic changes, and wealth accumulation create demand for professional investment management that BlackRock and Vanguard can capture through their established global platforms. Asian market development represents the largest growth opportunity, where rising wealth, aging populations, and developing capital markets create demand for retirement investing and professional asset management that could double BlackRock and Vanguard assets under management. Demographic trends worldwide favor index fund growth as aging populations require retirement income while lacking expertise for active portfolio management, creating sustained demand for low-cost passive investment strategies. Artificial intelligence integration enables BlackRock and Vanguard to provide superior investment management while reducing operational costs through automated portfolio management, risk monitoring, and customer service that eliminates human labor requirements. Cryptocurrency and digital asset management provide new growth opportunities while enabling BlackRock and Vanguard to extend their dominance into emerging asset classes that represent the future of digital finance and monetary systems. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, create opportunities for BlackRock and Vanguard to influence monetary policy implementation while potentially managing government digital currency operations that could replace traditional banking functions. Climate finance expansion provides unlimited growth opportunities through ESG investing mandates, carbon credit trading, and renewable energy financing that aligns with regulatory preferences while creating new asset classes under BlackRock and Vanguard management. Government partnerships expand through crisis management contracts, pension fund management, and sovereign wealth fund operations that create dependency relationships between governments and BlackRock while providing guaranteed revenue streams. Corporate monopolization accelerates as BlackRock and Vanguard voting control increases, enabling them to coordinate merger and acquisition activity that consolidates industries while eliminating competition that might challenge their portfolio companies. The airline industry demonstrates the monopolization endpoint, where BlackRock and Vanguard ownership has enabled industry consolidation from dozens of competitors to 4 major carriers that coordinate pricing and service levels through shared ownership structures. Banking industry consolidation follows similar patterns where BlackRock and Vanguard ownership enables coordination between major banks, while regulatory policies favor large institutions over community banks and credit unions. Technology platform monopolization accelerates through BlackRock and Vanguard ownership that enables coordination between competing platforms, while regulatory policies favor large technology companies over smaller competitors and startup innovation. Healthcare industry consolidation creates coordinated oligopolies where BlackRock and Vanguard ownership enables coordination between pharmaceutical companies, health insurers, and medical device manufacturers that reduces competition and innovation. Energy industry transformation toward renewable energy accelerates through coordinated pressure from BlackRock and Vanguard ownership that forces traditional energy companies to abandon profitable oil and gas operations for less profitable renewable energy investments. Political influence expansion occurs through increasing economic leverage that enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence electoral processes, regulatory policies, and international relations through their control over corporate political spending and lobbying activities. Democratic accountability declines as economic power concentrates in unelected institutional managers who exercise unprecedented influence over policies affecting millions of people while operating outside democratic oversight or political accountability. Regulatory capture becomes complete as government agencies rely entirely on BlackRock expertise for policy development. while regulatory officials rotate between BlackRock employment and government service without meaningful oversight of conflicts of interest. International governance influence expands as BlackRock and Vanguard economic power exceeds that of most sovereign governments, while enabling them to influence international trade policies, regulatory coordination, and monetary policies across multiple countries. Social engineering capabilities increase through coordinated ESG pressure that enables BlackRock and Vanguard to implement their social and political preferences across entire industries, while claiming to respond to market demand rather than exercising coordinated control. Alternative scenarios for preventing monopolization include antitrust enforcement that limits index fund ownership concentration, regulatory reforms that restore voting rights to individual investors, and political resistance to continued financial concentration. Antitrust enforcement faces challenges because traditional monopoly law focuses on horizontal mergers and vertical integration rather than passive ownership of competing companies that enables coordinated influence over competitive practices. Regulatory reform possibilities include ownership limits for index funds, mandatory voting pass-through to individual investors, and enhanced disclosure requirements for institutional voting decisions that would reduce BlackRock and Vanguard influence. Political resistance requires democratic movements that understand the implications of financial concentration while mobilizing voters to demand policies that restore competitive markets and democratic control over economic policies. International coordination would be necessary to prevent BlackRock and Vanguard from shifting operations between jurisdictions while maintaining influence over global economic policies through regulatory arbitrage and jurisdiction shopping. The probability of meaningful resistance appears low because BlackRock and Vanguard influence operates through complex institutional mechanisms that are difficult for voters to understand while generating benefits for current investors who might oppose reforms. The inevitable endpoint appears to be complete financial monopolization, where BlackRock and Vanguard control corporate America while exercising unprecedented influence over economic policies, political decisions, and social priorities through coordinated ownership of all major corporations. Understanding the trajectory toward future monopoly reveals how current trends in index fund growth and institutional concentration create dangerous dynamics that threaten market competition, democratic governance, and economic freedom, while appearing beneficial to current investors. The future monopoly represents the ultimate failure of market capitalism, where competition is replaced by coordinated control from unelected institutional managers who exercise unprecedented power while operating outside democratic accountability or meaningful regulatory oversight. The integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning into BlackRock and Vanguard's operations represents the next evolution of their control system, where human decision-making is replaced by algorithmic coordination that can manage unprecedented complexity while eliminating the inefficiencies of human judgment and emotional decision-making. BlackRock's Aladdin platform already manages $21 trillion in assets through sophisticated risk management algorithms that analyze millions of data points across global markets while providing investment recommendations, risk assessments, and portfolio optimization that exceeds human analytical capabilities. The expansion of Aladdin beyond BlackRock's internal operations to external institutional clients creates a unified decision-making system where thousands of financial institutions use the same analytical framework, risk models, and investment recommendations, effectively centralizing global investment decision-making through a single algorithmic system. Currently, over 200 institutional investors, including pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and competing asset managers, rely on Aladdin for portfolio management, risk analysis, and investment decisions, creating coordinated investment behavior that appears decentralized but operates through unified algorithmic control. The network effects of algorithmic coordination mean that market movements, risk assessments, and investment flows become synchronized across institutions that appear independent, but operate using identical analytical frameworks and decision-making algorithms provided by BlackRock. Machine learning capabilities enable continuous improvement of investment algorithms, while incorporating new data sources, market patterns, and predictive analytics that enhance the accuracy and sophistication of automated investment decisions that increasingly replace human portfolio management. Natural language processing allows algorithms to analyze news, social media, regulatory filings, and political developments in real time while incorporating this information into investment decisions that can respond to market events faster than human analysis and decision-making processes. Quantum computing development promises exponential improvements in computational power that could enable BlackRock and Vanguard to process vastly more complex market data while optimizing portfolio management across global markets with precision that exceeds anything currently possible through traditional computing. The integration of satellite imagery, economic data, supply chain monitoring, and social media sentiment analysis creates comprehensive market intelligence that enables algorithmic investment decisions based on information sources that individual investors or smaller institutions cannot access or process effectively. Predictive analytics enable algorithms to anticipate market movements, corporate developments, and economic trends while positioning portfolios to benefit from predicted events that human investors cannot forecast with comparable accuracy or consistency. High-frequency trading capabilities allow algorithmic systems to execute thousands of trades per second while exploiting tiny price discrepancies and market inefficiencies that generate profits through volume rather than traditional investment analysis or market timing. The coordination of algorithmic trading across BlackRock and Vanguard operations creates systematic market influence where coordinated buying and selling decisions can move entire markets while maintaining the appearance of independent algorithmic decision-making rather than coordinated market manipulation. The development of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and cryptocurrency markets provides BlackRock and Vanguard with unprecedented opportunities to extend their control into monetary policy implementation while potentially managing government digital currency operations that could replace traditional banking functions. BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF approval demonstrates their ability to capture emerging asset classes while extending their traditional dominance into cryptocurrency markets that were originally designed to operate outside traditional financial institutional control. The Bitcoin ETF success enables BlackRock to apply their proven capture strategy to cryptocurrency markets while converting decentralized digital assets into centralized investment products that generate management fees and provide institutional control over supposedly decentralized currencies. Cryptocurrency index funds provide mechanisms for extending BlackRock and Vanguard control into digital asset markets, while offering investors exposure to cryptocurrency price movements without requiring technical knowledge or direct cryptocurrency ownership and management. Central bank digital currency development creates opportunities for BlackRock to partner with government agencies in implementing digital monetary systems while providing technical expertise, infrastructure management, and operational capabilities that governments lack for digital currency management. The Federal Reserve's digital dollar development requires sophisticated technical infrastructure, cybersecurity capabilities, and operational expertise that BlackRock possesses, while providing opportunities for private management of public monetary systems. European Central Bank digital euro development provides similar opportunities for BlackRock and Vanguard to influence European monetary policy implementation while potentially managing digital currency operations that could affect millions of European citizens and businesses. Chinese digital yuan expansion demonstrates how digital currencies can enable unprecedented government surveillance and control over economic transactions, creating templates for digital monetary systems that BlackRock and Vanguard could help implement in democratic countries. Cryptocurrency regulation development enables BlackRock and Vanguard to influence regulatory frameworks while ensuring that cryptocurrency markets operate through traditional financial institutions rather than decentralized systems that could threaten their institutional control. Stablecoin regulation provides opportunities for BlackRock and Vanguard to manage dollar-backed digital currencies while extending their control over monetary systems and international payments that currently operate through traditional banking networks. Digital wallet integration enables BlackRock and Vanguard to participate in retail payment systems while collecting data on consumer spending patterns and financial behaviors that could enhance their investment decision-making and market intelligence capabilities. Blockchain technology adoption allows BlackRock and Vanguard to improve operational efficiency while maintaining institutional control over investment management, trade settlement, and asset custody that could reduce costs while enhancing their competitive advantages. Decentralized finance, DeFi integration, provides opportunities for BlackRock and Vanguard to capture emerging financial services while ensuring that supposedly decentralized financial systems operate through traditional institutional intermediaries rather than truly decentralized protocols. The expansion of ESG criteria into comprehensive social credit systems enables BlackRock and Vanguard to implement systematic behavioral control that extends far beyond traditional corporate governance into personal financial services, employment opportunities, and social participation based on compliance with preferred social and political behaviors. ESG scoring systems already affect corporate access to capital, insurance coverage, and business partnerships, while creating systematic pressure for compliance with social and environmental criteria that align with BlackRock and Vanguard policy preferences rather than market-driven business strategies. Personal ESG scoring represents the logical extension of corporate ESG systems, where individual consumer behaviors, political activities, and social media content could affect access to financial services, employment opportunities, and insurance coverage through algorithmic assessment of personal social credit. Banking relationships with BlackRock and Vanguard enable the implementation of personal social credit through lending decisions, account access, and financial services that reward compliant behavior, while restricting services for individuals who engage in socially or politically disfavored activities. Employment screening through ESG criteria affects hiring decisions across industries, where BlackRock and Vanguard portfolio companies implement hiring practices that prioritize social and political compliance over traditional qualifications and job performance metrics. Consumer credit scoring integration with social media monitoring, political activity tracking, and environmental behavior assessment creates comprehensive surveillance systems that affect access to mortgages, credit cards, and consumer financing based on algorithmic assessment of social compliance. Insurance coverage discrimination based on social credit scores affects access to health insurance, property coverage, and life insurance, while creating financial pressure for compliance with preferred social behaviors and political positions that align with BlackRock and Vanguard policy preferences. Social media monitoring enables real-time assessment of individual political opinions, social activities, and personal behaviors, while incorporating this information into financial services decisions that reward compliance and punish dissent from preferred social and political positions. Political activity tracking through financial transaction monitoring, location data, and communication surveillance creates comprehensive profiles of individual political behavior while enabling systematic discrimination based on political affiliations and activities. Travel restrictions through financial services control enable systematic limitation of individual mobility based on social credit scores while coordinating across airlines, hotels, and travel services that are controlled by BlackRock and Vanguard ownership stakes. Professional licensing coordination across industries enables systematic exclusion of individuals from professional opportunities based on social credit scores while affecting access to legal, medical, accounting, and other professional services that require licensing and regulatory approval. Educational access discrimination affects admission to universities, professional programs, and continuing education based on social credit assessment, while influencing intellectual development and career opportunities for individuals who fail to maintain adequate social compliance scores. The integration of surveillance technologies with financial services creates comprehensive monitoring systems that enable BlackRock and Vanguard to collect unprecedented amounts of personal data while coordinating surveillance across multiple industries and platforms that they control through ownership stakes. Smartphone data collection through financial apps, payment systems, and investment platforms provides real-time location tracking, communication monitoring, and behavioral analysis that creates comprehensive profiles of individual activities, relationships, and preferences. Internet surveillance through social media platforms, search engines, and e-commerce websites enables monitoring of individual political opinions, consumer preferences, and social activities, while incorporating this information into financial services and investment decisions. Facial recognition technology integration with payment systems, security cameras, and access controls creates comprehensive identification and tracking systems that monitor individual movements and activities across public and private spaces. Biometric data collection. Through financial services authentication, health monitoring, and security systems creates permanent identification systems that cannot be altered or avoided, while enabling comprehensive tracking of individual activities and behaviors. Credit card transaction monitoring provides detailed records of individual purchasing patterns, political donations, and lifestyle choices, while enabling algorithmic assessment of social and political compliance based on spending behaviors and merchant relationships.